Hi everyone, I'm Cesar Miguel. I work for the Migratory Species section in the Australian Federal Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. And I'll briefly recap what light pollution is, and I'll discuss how the Australian government has really responded to this threat and the actions we've taken and sort of the next steps to continue to mitigate light pollution. So apologies. We've already had kind of the whole background on light pollution, so I'll be fairly quick. But obviously, almost all life on Earth has evolved over millions of years. We adapted to 3 different cycles of light and dark: the 24-hour photoperiod, lunar cycles from brighter full moon nights, which steadily become darker towards the new moon phase, and finally yearly seasonal cycles, so from longer nights and shorter days in winter to longer days and shorter nights in the summer. And obviously organisms evolved to be adapted to these predictable light-dark cycles to become successful. Diurnal species like us, we use the night for rest, recovery, and refuge. And nocturnal species obviously use the cover of darkness for reproduction, foraging, movement, and to evade predators a lot of the time. And for my purposes, the light pollution is really any sort of artificial light at night that alters the natural patterns of light and dark in the ecosystems. And for a more entertaining recap, let's just play one of our animations.
G'day, it's me, Maggie from next door. Sorry to bother you, but the kids are trying to sleep and that light is shining right in our home. You know, when we fly in and out of home, the glare from the light makes it really hard for us to focus, let alone get a good night's sleep. Did you know that light pollution can have serious consequences for all kinds of wildlife? Light spillage, like in floodlight, can disrupt reproductive cycles and make it difficult or unsafe for wildlife to go out and search for food. Light colour is distracting and confusing for wildlife. Sky glow is the distant light glow from a city, making it hard to hide from predators in the dark or see the stars that many of us need to navigate. Artificial light at night is increasing every year, and that means more dangerous impacts for me and my friends. Be a good neighbour. Play your part and help us switch off light pollution together. Thanks, Nick.
Alright, thanks Amanda for forcing me to play that for everyone. I wasn't usually going to keep that in my presentation. So Matt, we've seen all this before. While light has been great for humans, it's allowing us greater amenity at night, it obviously imposes a serious stress on wildlife. And for my purposes in protected species, biodiversity is already under some serious stress from a range of threats: climate change, land clearing, invasive species, countless threats, and species decline is often death by 1,000 cuts. And light pollution is one of those cuts. And the depth of that cut really depends on the sensitivity of the species. There's the 10% per year growth in light pollution figure we're familiar with. Initially we thought it was 2% based on some of the satellite images, but I really like the 10% study because it's based on citizen science data. And for the purposes of wildlife, the citizen science data is readings that humans are taking on the ground and what they're experiencing. And that's more biologically relevant to protected species. And this also, the issue of light pollution also ties into things like climate change. There's a very recent study that just got published. So Cheryl and Anderson attempted to quantify the cost of light pollution to ecosystem services, and that amounted to about $3 trillion a year globally, and $3 billion a year in Australia, and I think something around $1.3 billion a year in New Zealand. Somebody want to take an image? I heard a shot go. Right, so I'm change this one. And just another picture. So this is Siding Spring Observatory in New South Wales in Australia. Just another demonstration of how far away light pollution can really reach. Sydney, which is about 400 kilometers away from the observatory, you can still see. Some basic physiology. I don't know if anybody's gone over this yet, but obviously in mammalian eyes, we have rods and cones, which help form pictures and shapes of objects to help us navigate our environment. But relatively recently, a third type of photoreceptor was discovered, the photosensitive retinal ganglion cell, and that doesn't really form pictures the way rods and cones do. Instead, it sort of governs or triggers the biological clocks, at least in mammals. And it does tend to be sensitive in blue light, or sensitive to blue light. And this is a highly conserved sensitivity across a lot of taxa groups. The only reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a huge caveat here that yes, while that sensitivity exists, if you think about plants and other taxa groups, any sort of spectrum that humans use to visualize our environment, another taxa group is likely to detect it and potentially be impacted by it. So there's not really going to be a straightforward answer to the kind of light we use. And the way we can measure impact, mostly, it's very difficult to measure those physiological impacts, but for purposes of conservation, we can measure behavioral impacts, and we know that wildlife can be attracted or disoriented by light. They can be confused or disoriented by light. Famously, marine turtles can get caught up in jetties. It can make it difficult for them to get out to the open ocean. And light pollution can repel species from accessing big parts of their habitat or other resources. Another impact is called masking. So light can mask one of those three light cycles I mentioned. It can make it seem as though it's a different time of day, a different time of month, or a different time of year. Pardon me. And that can also trigger some of those physiological changes. Interestingly enough, artificial light is also known to benefit a lot of invasive species. It can help cats and foxes see much better, which is a problem. And famously, we have cane toads in Australia, and they tend to sit around light poles and just consume all the insects that get trapped by light. And although a lot of those impacts are terrestrial, we also have a marine environment that we've got to take care of. And pardon me. Light can reach coral reefs at over 30 meters. Light from ships can impact fish behavior at over 200 meters. We now live in a world where about 2 million square kilometers of ocean are considered light polluted. So basically, light impacts a variety of wildlife in a variety of different ways. It can affect behavior, physiology, it can enhance existing pressures, and all of that can have cascading impacts on ecosystems. It doesn't really take much light to trigger some of those changes, since impacts can occur at relatively low light levels. And it obviously impacts us as well through a variety of ways, by wasting energy, by wasting resources, by diminishing the value of ecosystem services. This connects, it's kind of an intersection between conservation, circular economy, climate change. So, if we want to manage some of those impacts or manage ecosystem functions, we've got to think about how we manage light. So, the Australian government developed the National Light Pollution Guidelines for Wildlife in 2020, and the guidelines are actually broadly applicable to all susceptible wildlife. And the first purpose is to raise awareness of the impacts of light pollution. Even to this day, we all tend to be in bubbles in this group, but most people still don't realize that light pollution is a problem for wildlife. They also provide 6 best practice lighting design principles. These are very similar to Dark Sky International's 5 principles, and they should all be, as mentioned, used together or seen as a toolbox to draw from to mitigate light pollution impacts, because there's no silver bullet aside from natural darkness. And they also provide a framework, or an adaptive management framework for managing the impacts of light pollution on wildlife. And they describe in detail how light should be considered in an environmental impact assessment process and then adaptively managed. And so I guess the thing to say, I know we throughout today there's been a lot of discussion about thresholds, which kind of light impacts wildlife in what way. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to discover that with each species, and then there's variation within each species. So from our purposes, the goal is just to make sure there's no impact on wildlife. whatever it takes to get there from A to B. So again, it is about the purpose of the light, what is the actual risk, and you do the best you can to find some kind of mitigation method that you think will work, and then you assess its success. And then if there's still a problem, do your best to change it. They also lay out approaches to bring together ecologists, biologists, alongside lighting engineers and lighting designers. Traditionally, these two groups have not really interacted, but obviously, there's some here today. I'm actually getting quite heartened and quite optimistic to see more and more designers engaging in this space, and more scientists reaching out to engineers. And then lastly, the guidelines themselves are only about 20 pages. The rest are technical appendices where there's taxa-specific advice on other taxa groups. Right now we've got specific advice for sea turtles, migratory shorebirds, seabirds, bats, terrestrial mammals, and ecological communities. So, what are we doing at the federal level in Australia? Even today, after all this work's been done, in consultation with a lot of different stakeholders, we still identified raising awareness and enhancing the implementation of light pollution mitigation as the two major priorities still. So in terms of sort of both awareness raising and trying to get the guidelines further out there, we brought the Australia's National Light Pollution Guidelines to the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Sorry, it's a mouthful. It's CMS for short. And at the 13th Conference of Parties to CMS, the member nations, all 133, endorsed the guidelines and essentially made them their own for all intents and purposes. However, they began work to draft their own international light pollution guidelines for wildlife, or for migratory species rather. You can see it there with that QR code, you can access it there. And at the 14th Conference of Parties, they presented the guidelines, their international version of our guidelines, for adoption. They accepted them, they're now publicly available. The only difference is they've added species-specific advice, thank you, for migratory bats and migratory land birds. So this basically means that if your jurisdiction, your country, doesn't have a framework for managing light impacts, you can take these and run with them. They're here for you to use. Also mentioning that New Zealand's been critical in this space. They really support us at CMS anytime we put something up for light pollution, and they also have done things like develop their own guidance, like reducing light-induced vessel strikes for seabirds in New Zealand commercial fishing vessels. So in terms of awareness raising, we still attend events. We launch huge social media campaigns, attend conferences. We've also developed commons materials. So you saw one of the light pollution animations we developed. We've got 5 that are available on our webpage. And we've also developed some 1- and 2-pages that have just very basic information that everybody here, you'll see a QR code at the very end, you can access, you can share with your community. Another big win was the Australian and New Zealand standard on the control of the obtrusive effects of outdoor lighting. I sat on the committee for this, as did my predecessor, and we were finally able to get them to include wildlife as a consideration. So I know it's a very technical document, not many people in this room will actually use it, but the point is that this standard actually prevents worst practice when it comes to lighting design. We've also put $200,000 into reducing light pollution in coastal communities in a grants program, and that included things like upgrades and retrofits, light management plans for local communities and local governments, conducting lighting audits, upgrading bad lighting, retrofitting lighting near turtle nesting habitat, and identifying effective approaches for communities, to encourage communities to reduce their light pollution. And then lastly, we've also, not lastly, we had just funded earlier in the year a case study from the Sunshine Coast Council, a local government in Australia. They've got turtles there. And a lot of feedback we've gotten from people on the guidelines is that we don't really know how to use them or implement them. The Sunshine Coast Council is identified as an ideal candidate to do this case study because they've actually taken the guidelines from start to finish, implement them, and they're developing guidance on that process and all the different ways they've been able to manage light pollution in their jurisdiction. They're ideal because they've also been monitoring turtles well before the guidelines came out, and they'll do a retrofit, and we'll see the outcome of that later this year. Essentially, the outcomes of the grants, those are available now. If anybody wants those reports, I can share them with you. I really want them to act as a toolbox that other communities can draw from to get lessons learned from other communities. And this case study, I'm hoping for it to really act as a template as well that other communities can adapt for their own purposes when it comes to using the guidelines and mitigating light pollution for themselves. And lastly, this is the most important thing I think that we're working on into the future, is we've got the Value in Darkness Symposium in Melbourne, March next year. It's a QR code if you want to attend. Obviously in the past, as the Australian government, we've consulted communities and the wider public on the light pollution guidelines and light pollution policy more generally, but we've never actually brought all the stakeholders in one room to really discuss the problems. And so the symposium, which will be similar to what we've got today, but will also include a roundtable. The roundtable is critical because we're hoping to discuss with traditional owners, experts, policymakers, industry, and hopefully identify what challenges each of these groups face, identify opportunities for collaboration, and address, and also opportunities for addressing light pollution more broadly, and hopefully align all of our key priorities into the future into tackling light pollution, so we have more of a coordinated method, coordinated approach, and also just developing some of those relationships, because as I said, there's quite a bit of siloing in the light pollution space, at least when it comes to engineers and policymakers. So yeah, if you're interested or know somebody who is, please come along. Yeah, with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. It's great to see also how this has been taken up around the world in various forums, so look forward to seeing how that progresses. So thank you for all your work on this. Right, there's a lot of questions. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk and your work. I'm wondering if in your engagement with communities and government agencies and various things, if you have talked with the climate change community about struggles that they had in communicating complex ideas and solutions, and sort of had a brain dump of their lessons learned of how to communicate and how not to communicate about these complex issues.
Embarrassingly, no. That's a very good point, and I should absolutely reach out to them. We didn't even think about it all when we were developing light pollution policy, but I'll absolutely get on it now. That's a great idea.
Okay, thanks for your great presentation today. So just from experience using the National Light Pollution Guidelines for Wildlife before, I felt that the document was quite comprehensive, and it's quite useful for us to use as a lighting designer. I just want to know from, obviously in Australia you guys have different types of wildlife to New Zealand. I'm not sure if you have the kiwi bird there as well. So in New Zealand with the different types of wildlife, have you been able to collaborate with some of your New Zealand counterparts? And we're probably going to be doing that in the future, so we can also get a bit better understanding of the guidelines for wildlife.
I mean, when it comes to integrating any research about kiwi wildlife, no. But in the international stage, as I mentioned, when we went to CMS to endorse, to try to promote and work on developing the international light pollution guidelines for migratory species, New Zealand had played a critical role in supporting that. I think Graham Taylor over at DOC has been a big supporter. But yeah, there's always opportunities for more collaboration.
Alright, so again, I'm not a wildlife expert, but you're sort of saying that in New Zealand and Australia, some of the wildlife is very similar, so it can be applied to right?
Yeah.
My question.
So I guess the first 20 pages of the guidelines are general in nature and they're very adaptable. So you can absolutely take what's in the first part and adapt it to the museum context, specifically designed to be broad. Are you searching for it now?
Is there a slide you want to go to, sorry?
Maybe there, the international, you can just grab this one right here.
This one?
Yeah. So the guidelines are general in nature, and they were intentionally designed that way so they could be applied. But we can share that, yeah.
So I have a question, Cesar. You're working in a government department for climate change, energy, environment and water. That's an awful lot of things going on. Are you doing all those things yourself, or are you focused solely on light pollution and wildlife?
It really depends on how much I can get away with. If I'm being honest, I've really tried to push hard to focus primarily on light pollution, but I'm the only person I'm aware of in the government who's actually working on light pollution actively.
I thought Karen Arthur was your colleague.
She was my predecessor, yeah, but she's
Has she gone?
Yeah, she's gone now. So now this past year, I've only been able to work on light pollution about 25 to 50% of my time. Because I also work on migratory species, like turtles.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, we'll do one question out of Beth, and then we'll come to you.
Thanks a lot for your talk. That was really interesting. What I was wondering about, you were mentioning that invasive species such as cane toads are often like benefit from light, kind of, or can benefit. I just wonder, I mean, there's species, they are, how can I say, native to some areas. So not to Australia, obviously, you got the cane toad came from, where was it, Mexico or something? Yeah, I don't remember, but like, can you see it also there, that those species are attracted for light? And therefore, how does it change the impact of invasive species that they have on wildlife in Australia?
Sorry, can you clarify a little bit? You mean how they impacted in Mexico?
No, sorry, like the cane toads, what was their natural habitat? Like, where did they came from originally?
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
So we're only thinking about them in the Australian context. And
Okay,
that there's a problem there.
Okay, yeah, but like, I just wonder, you said that they benefit from light there. I was just wondering whether it is a thing of the interaction.
How they benefit?
No, sorry, it's maybe a problem of my English.
I think she wants to know how they behave in the country where it came from.
Oh, don't know.
Yeah.
Honestly, don't know.
Okay.
I'm not a cane toad specialist.
Hawaii.
Hawaii, okay,
Right.
thank you.
They're from Hawaii, apparently. So we've got one last question. It's great that there's so much interest. We'll take one last question from Ruskin, and then I encourage you to take it up.
All right, thank you, Ruskin.
So this is less of a question maybe than just I want a note of acknowledgement and congratulations. Like 5 years ago, Karen Arthur came and gave one of the keynote addresses, and if I can recall at that time, the guidelines, maybe they hadn't even quite been adopted by the Australian national government. It was still to come, and they have gone in record time from guidelines in Australia to now adopted by 133 countries around the world. And while there are still guidelines, that is often a precursor to regulation. So I think it's worth everyone to acknowledge that here's a great success story of a great idea being taken, and now all these 133 countries can run with it and advocate it to their elected officials, to their government agencies. So just hats off and congratulations, and please pass on.